Exceptional Randos show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Well, that was random. Exceptional Radio.
Well, that was different. We've got an oil spill off the coast of Mauritius, and it looks like there's going to be some unbelievable ecological damage, like irreparable ecological damage. U.S. COVID cases are over 5 million. Let's see. There's a short list of states that all have over 100,000 COVID cases, or at least tallied totals. And let's see what else. Indiana's way past the point where Italy locked down completely and went under full quarantine lockdown. And let's see what other kind of crazy shit's been going on. Oh yeah, people are being banned from flying on airlines because they refuse to wear a mask. So that's good old-fashioned right of admission refusal in full effect. It's not a bad week so far.
Yeah, it's been a pretty interesting news week for sure. The no-fly list is pretty funny because it's the same people who get put on the no-fly list that probably don't want bakeries to serve gay people. So it's a little karmic retribution.
Yeah, that Venn diagram's a circle.
For sure. There's no question. The same people that get put on a no-fly list for not wearing masks don't want gay people to have cakes. I can say that without question.
That's so fucked up. Poor bastard.
Well, it's funny too, because then I'm like, who are these people that have the capacity to fly and can afford plane tickets, but also don't believe in wearing a mask? It's a weird. America is a weird. The economic distribution of capital is so strange when you see, like, people make fun of it all the time. Those HGTV shows about the home flipping or whatever, and the people are always like, I raise cats for a living and I paint toenails of cats for a living, and they somehow are able to buy like multi-million-dollar homes by painting cat toes or whatever. You know, it's never like a job that actually produces anything of value.
Hamster trainers.
What's up?
Hamster trainers.
Right, yeah. or like, I train caddies to play golf, not actual people that are going to play, but I train the caddies to play. Even though they're never actually going to be using this, they need to understand how to play. So I'm a specifically caddy trainer. Whereas, like, there are these elements of, like, this dude, Dr. Disrespect. He makes millions of dollars for wearing sunglasses and having a mullet and playing video games and pretending to be, well, I think he's actually a douchebag in real life, but pretending to be more of a douchebag.
That's the guy that got banned on Twitch.
Right. After they gave him a multi-million-dollar deal. So it's like those types of people where you have them in America they don't generate millions of dollars. They generate advertising revenue and get paid for it. And then in the process, somehow they're getting millions of dollars for like random stuff like being good at video games, while the essential workers are not getting any sort of raises in the long-term economic growth. And it's a weird sort of what's the word? The lip service to honoring the essential workers while also not actually paying them what they're worth, and in the process um giving insane amount of wealth to a neo bourgeoisie in the form of like the Paris Hiltons and the Dr. Disrespects and the um what's the Kanye's like a neo bourgeoisie, or Jay-Z or
Didn't
Puff Daddy.
Mark Zuckerberg became
Mark Zuckerberg, he's neo bourgeoisie.
he's got $100 billion now.
Yeah. Elon Musk is neo. Well, he's not really neo because he's like a second
Yeah.
generation um, that tries to pretend he earned his way into billions of dollars as if he didn't get a subsidy to get there, or have rich parents in the first place, or parents that exploited populations to amass wealth because they weren't really independently rich. I don't even know if there's such a thing as independently rich, in that almost 9 out of 10 times the people who the West tries to say were independently rich actually just exploited the shit out of somebody or something, whether it's like a land, like a resource that ended up hurting a population in the process, and then them being like, oh, I couldn't have anything to do with the pollution. I just got the money, and the pollution's their problem. And
What would you have to discover or find or invent to even qualify as independently rich?
I mean, you got to look at an example like Tesla and Edison, where you had one man inventing things for the sake of benefiting the population, and then another man stealing those ideas to then make money. And that's like the history of science and capitalism in a nutshell. You anytime somebody seems to be inclined to have the capacity to invent something, they almost are never doing it to abuse a population for the sake of monetary gain. And that's why this like idea of what can you invent to become rich is like a paradox, because that if you're inventing something to solve a problem, there's actually probably not a huge profit margin on that thing,
Yeah, but
which is
I don't mean invent something. Like, you'd have to discover something, essentially.
right. Yeah, I think the gold rush is one of the best examples, but in the process, they destroyed the
The West Coast.
ecosystem.
Yeah.
So it's like this is what I mean. It's like you can discover gold, but you destroy your ecosystem, extracting it from the land.
So somebody
So
would have to.
it's not like they actually profited. It's a law of equivalent exchange that they talk
Yeah.
about in Full Metal Alchemist, in that there's a cost. There's always a cost for this shit, and they try to act like there's no cost, because then they try to hide the cost and occlude it, or be like, oh, since we're drilling in a second world nation or a third world nation, the pollution doesn't matter because we get all the profit from it, and they have to deal with, and they have to clean it up. Or
And then 20 years later, we have to clean it up.
yep.
Well, isn't that the capitalist imperialist model? Is
Yep.
try and offset the debt from the generators of, or the manipulators of capital, in order to maintain the illusion of a society that's successful. Because we do it to our own people in the United States. We have the people who control capital, mass capital, who have inherited capital, and we have the financial powers and the industrial powers who control the debt of a majority of the American people, or people who are disenfranchised, and that's used to offset the illusion of exploitation, or it's used to obfuscate the exploitation that's actually occurring, and creating an illusion of success that can never be achieved equitably by everybody. And in terms of resources in another country, it's basically the MO of any imperialist power to try and siphon the wealth away from a country that isn't as developed as itself or doesn't have the capacity to defend itself or can in some way be exploited in its governmental structure or easily corrupted in the form of some of the local authorities by tempting people who are willing to make those kinds of deals to exploit their own people. And then you have the debt or the negative effects occurring in the immediate environment in which the resources are being extracted and the people are being exploited. So that's reflected in an economy that has an infinite glass ceiling for the people who are perhaps mining the resources or who are involved in the extraction of the resources. And resources can be anything from raw materials for manufacturing. They can be oil. We can look at it that way, or we can talk about rare metals or minerals, things like that. Because if there was really an equitable distribution and compensation for labor and wealth, then the people who were in the mines trying to extract precious metals and arbitrarily priced gemstones would be receiving fair housing and compensation on par with the people that are then purchasing or displaying those products in the country that's benefiting from those capitalistic exchanges.
Well, part of what it feels like is we're getting to a point where the arbitrary, artificial illusion of scarcity is starting to fall away. And then once we understand that there is no actual scarcity of resources, it's just an inefficiency of allocation and an intentional misallocation of resources and intentional accumulation of resources disproportionately in one place to create artificial scarcity. As we get closer to that transparent situation, I think that's when we start to get situations in which people have to create illogical frameworks to rationalize paying for things. Because I'll just create this I didn't create it, but this this thought experiment. If we have, let's just focus on electricity. If we get to a point where we have mastered electricity distribution, conduction, storage, and transmission to the point that it doesn't cost like to generate electricity anymore, why should anybody pay for electricity at that point? I'll ask you guys, like, do you guys have a logical reason? If we get to that point, why should anybody pay for electricity at that point?
Is electricity being produced like at a person's location, or is it still
Doesn't-
being produced at
Doesn't
a?
matter produced. If we as a society have the capacity to produce it, doesn't matter where it's produced.
Well, I mean, on some level, you have to some. There has to be a way to pay for the infrastructure, if there is an infrastructure.
But I'm saying we've established that the infrastructure that's generating this electricity is cost effective to the point that it's no longer cost negative. Like, this is a cost
Neutral.
no, positive flow, not even neutral. This is a cost positive flow of electricity. That's what I'm saying. If we get to that point, why, like, does it matter
Do we still
who
have powers?
owns the thing
Are there
as to
still?
why people? Because if that's the case,
Well, is
then
there still
this
a
is
power
why
substation
the
or a
private industry
transformer?
is an actual arbitrary situation to keep people from actually attaining equity and equality. And it's just an illusion of the potential for ever actually attaining it. So someone can arbitrarily just hold the mechanisms that are actually
but
producing more for society.
are there still power substations and transformers and power lines?
I think you're focusing on the wrong part of my question, because what I'm saying is, if we get to a point as a society where we can produce energy and the output is more energy than it costs for the system to produce that energy, doesn't matter where those things exist, because again, that is arbitrarily why people are then paying for power at that point, and not because we can't produce enough power for everybody for free.
Sounds like you're talking about a perpetually renewable source of energetic surplus.
You mean like the sun?
Right. So I'm talking about, yeah, so basically solar energy. So if everybody, or hydrogen, or
hydrogen is not solar energy. Hydrogen is the most abundant element in the universe.
So using hydrogen in order to generate energy as a renewable source?
We have been framed as if the Earth has been a closed source system when it's 100% not a closed system. So our notion of renewable resources has been framed as if all our resources have to grow on this planet in the first place to be resources, which is obviously an incorrect framework. Like, we can split photons to produce hydrogen. Yeah, that's one way. We can grab hydrogen from other places in the universe. Like, there's so many ways we can get hydrogen beyond just solar. And that's why I'm like, the way we've been framed, the way we've been presented energy as a framework for how we consume it, quote unquote, is in a capitalist system that presents a closed, limited set of resources, which is 100% not the case. So that's where I'm saying, if we get to a point, now we are not there yet, but if we get to a point where as a society we can produce energy at more than 100% efficiency, which is how we become a type 1 civilization, if we ever get there, why would anybody ever have to pay for, if we become a type 1 civilization, just let me frame it that way, why should anybody have to pay for energy in a type 1 civilization?
I don't see any reason why we should have to pay for energy in a type 1 civilization. I think by the time we reach that point, or if we exceed that point, then the capitalistic framework will have been questioned and perhaps dismantled to a point that it's no longer relevant.
Which I think this is obvious to people who've ever watched Star Trek, but this is why I'm trying to present it as like a thought experiment, in that, like, again, this is not about the individual pieces of what makes a society energy efficient are very much arbitrary. It could be cold fusion. It could be some sort of new combination of solar, wind, and hydro, whatever. It's all arbitrary. But what I'm saying is, if we ever actually make it to a type 1 civilization, the argument for charging people for anything is really going to have to be examined to question why there would be any sort of monetary exchange in a society that can produce. And that's where I'm saying, again, like, if we're saying, Elon Musk, who got a government subsidy, is the one who comes up with this technology, and that's why we all have to pay him. But it's like, at that point, then it becomes a really questionable line of ownership that is dependent upon people not realizing Elon Musk got subsidies in the first place, as if he created that technology without ever having any sort of government assistance to get there, or like, again, Elon hasn't obviously come up with this technology, but let's just assume SpaceX does it with Elon's face. It wasn't just Elon. It wasn't just one person. But if it happens under SpaceX, because of the way the laws are written to protect their intellectual property, SpaceX would control potentially civilization changing technology to then say, oh, we all have to pay this dude for perpetual energy because he's going to control the Tesla or SpaceX battery that goes into our homes, and we're going to have the centers built in each city, and it's going to be a jobs program, but we're all still going to be stuck in feudalism, even though energy is perpetual at that point. And again, this is where I'm like, it feels to me like these narratives are set to reinforce our notion of loyalty to capitalism and feudalism. So we go into that society and still want to pay Elon because he saved us. And that's where I'm like, this is a very dangerous time, I think, in that the technology being tied to individuals and not groups of scientists and engineers becomes in the same way that people don't recognize, like, Andy Warhol had people working in a warehouse to make his art in many cases. Like, after a certain point, it's like there are multiple people that create identities as what we know as stars in many cases. And a lot of times these people are constructed in ways that we can't even imagine.
Well, it goes back to I think the Tesla Edison paradigm you brought up. Edison basically took over the intellectual property rights to a lot of that technology and used it for profit. And I think the commercial legal framework or infrastructure that exists within the Western world allows for people to take ownership over resource generation technology that may not necessarily have like a profitability cap, basically something that can be disseminated or distributed to all people because it creates, as you said, more resources than it consumes. If that's what I'm picking up.
That's exactly right. Something creates more resources than it consumes. That's the most simple way to say it. Is like, it don't have to be money. It don't have to be gold. Whatever this or economic machine is, it creates more resources than it produces, or it creates more resources than it consumes. Sorry. But again, this is all. There's a talk of a new vehicle that could potentially go from New York to London, a commercial flight vehicle from London in 90 minutes. This is, I think, a little over twice as fast as the Concorde. So I think that one was like a 3 or 4 hour flight or something like that. And this is, when we're talking about the people that would actually be able to take advantage of that type of technology, it's only going to be the extreme upper classes that are taking, the 90-minute flight between New York and London. And they'll say it's for business, but most of the time it's going to be for leisure, and they're just going to be doing this shit to prove that they're the uber wealthy class. So there's this separation of technology being disseminated to the people as if, I don't know, however, I never got to fly on a Concorde before they got decommissioned. I got to stand in one that was not flying, but I never actually got to fly on a Concorde. I don't know how many people got to, but their tickets, I think, were in some cases like 20 grand. For like, that might have been a one-way ticket, and I don't know how. Like, I never was in a situation where I could realistically look at taking a Concorde flight at any point in my life. And that's just where I'm saying I think 90% of people probably could never afford a Concorde flight, but in when these things are presented to us in the news, they make it seem like, oh, you're going to be able to fly from New York to London in 90 minutes, but they're really disseminating this information so we accept the fact that the uber rich wealthy class gets to do that while we dream about doing that and never actually get to do that in our lifetime.
Concorde tickets were about 10 times the average cost of a flight from New York to London in the 80s.
How much was it?
So in the 80s, it was about $500-$600 for a one way trip. No, yeah, one way trip from New York to London. That was the average, and then the average Concorde flight from New York to London was about 8 grand, or sorry, 8,000 pounds.
Yeah, if it's 8,000 pounds, that was probably like 10 or 12 grand then.
Yeah,
It's fine.
the
I
average
don't
round
think.
trip price 12,000 USD.
Yeah, yeah. I was gonna say because I didn't think the pound was a 1-to-1.
No, it's not. It's never. I don't think it's ever been.
I don't think so. Yeah. Which yeah, that's like yeah, $12,000. Was that round trip?
Yeah, that's a round trip average.
Okay.
So there were cheaper flights, but that's the standard cost of a for 1 ton. Um, yeah, for 1 ton. Good God.
You say for 1 ton?
They do 1 ton of jet fuel per seat,
Oh, okay.
something like that,
Got it.
for the flight.
That makes sense.
Not per seat. That'd be like wait, that'd be a lot.
I
Maintenance
mean, I think
aircraft to
that
gulp
makes
of
sense
jet
because
fuel
it's
at a
like
rate of holy
they
shit.
calculate the tons of fuel by the weight of
Yeah,
the
a transatlantic flight
load.
required the high maintenance aircraft to gulp jet fuel at a rate of 1 ton per seat, and the average round trip was $12,000.
Yeah, because that's why it's like your luggage weight does actually make a difference. People complain about that shit, but it's like, yeah, you don't want to overload your plane and then not be able to get off the fucking runway because everybody brought 200 pounds of luggage.
I remember reading about Concorde when they're sitting still on the ground, the cockpits are all jam packed, but as they accelerate, um, gaps start to fill or start to emerge between computer console and the walls because the plane starts to stretch.
Well, I remember they had the cockpit like actually shifted positions, like it was like
The nose would
yeah,
lower
the
for
nose was
landing,
almost prone to or pronate.
pronated, so that they could see the
And then it would
runway when they
like
were
straighten
landing.
out.
Yeah, it's a crazy ass aircraft. It's a good
Yeah, I
thing that
think it
that
was like
thing's not like
um,
the standard. That'd be stupid expensive right now. How much would a flight have
yeah,
cost?
it's like well, it's just because the technology was not it's not like that they didn't research it. It was just they went in other directions before making that more accessible. So then it was like that there was no real reason to put out 1,000 Concords or whatever. So the fleet was, I think the fleet, I forget how many was in it, but they built the one fleet and that was it. And that's why they decommissioned them.
So in
Just because they were like, yeah, we don't need any more of these. This
Emirates,
this design was cool, but we're moving on to a different design.
Emirates Airlines is going to relaunch the Concorde into service in 2022.
Yeah, they must have
They must have
redesigned it a lot because I think they were like capping out at Mach a little under Mach 3, and now the shit is like the passenger stuff they're talking about is Mach 5. So that original fleet just wouldn't have cut it with the new shit. They wouldn't have been able to charge 12 grand compared to the new fleet.
they've purchased two Concordes from Air France, and they're going to be flying to where from Dubai? They're flying somewhere from Dubai to somewhere else. They've got to be restored to airworthy condition too. So it's not like they're
Oh,
gonna
so they're like taking the old ones and like putting
re-
them back into service.
yeah, they're gonna reservice them.
Oh, okay. I thought they were like doing a new. Oh shit! So it's even the same fucking planes. That's
Yeah,
crazy.
they're gonna fly from Dubai International to Heathrow, and Heathrow
Yeah.
back to Dubai, and they're gonna fly to JFK and back. And they're also gonna fly to Singapore, Shanghai Airport and back, and Delhi International. So that's 4 routes.
Yeah, I was gonna say I couldn't imagine them building an entire new fleet of the exact same Concorde, but that makes a lot more sense that they're just resurfacing the same fleet. Yeah, 'cause that's like that's part of it. Is that that fleet was like really good for its time, but the technology just got dated so quickly. Um, again, that the the government, well, not just our government, but governments around the world have been doing a lot of research into um,
It flew
manned and
1,687
unmanned
miles an hour.
vehicles to the point that I think what was it 2011 when they did that unmanned test where they hit 22 Mach 22. It was either 2011 or 2013.
Oh, that like the
Regardless,
X-48 or whatever it was.
that was almost a decade ago that the government unmanned vehicles were hitting 4 times what they're reporting now for the commercial vehicles. That's where I'm like, yeah, of course they're gonna tell us the shit we see is UFOs and aliens, like because they don't want us to realize, oh yeah, now we've got Mach 30 and Mach 40 vehicles that can turn a corner on the drop on a hairpin, and yeah, it's in our best interest if you think that's UFOs from out of this world, because they just don't want people to know what's there. So then they can be like, yeah, pay us money for our military, pay us money for this gas, pay us money for this electricity, because we've mastered that shit 40 years ago, but we're just going to keep subjugating or allowing you to subjugate yourselves because for whatever reason, Americans just love being uh, feudal.
Well,
Like
you know,
it seems like something that's deeply ingrained in this society is just a love for feudalism.
I'm still pretty impressed by all the UFO videos where you see somebody with their camera holding it up at the sky and you see this bright light moving around in kind of a weird laser zigzag type thing. And part of me wants to believe it's just some guy on the ground a couple miles away pointing a green laser at the sky. But then there's the part of me that really enjoys the excitement that the person with the camera has. Like, oh my god, look at it! Oh, what's it doing now? Ah, and like that stuff's great because that means that there are people out there who still haven't read or haven't been paying attention to the internet for the past decade.
Right.
That's good. That's okay. I'm okay with that. I think that's where like a significant portion of my entertainment on the internet comes from is people that just haven't been paying attention and their reactions.
Yeah, those people do provide a lot of entertainment. In that, as you're saying, it's like if they just did a quick search, they could find a rational explanation. But
Yeah.
watching them revel in not wanting to learn the actual solution is sort of entertaining.
I mean, it's
it's,
it's when you see like a dialogue about anything that's kind of like I wonder why this is the way it is, and people ask that question, but then they fail to go do the research. It's like, wait, you just ask the question. You have Google right in front of you. Just go ask the question. It takes 30 seconds, maybe even less, and then of course the string of ideas about why that thing exists. That stuff's actually quite beautiful. I mean, that's some creativity that sometimes I just wonder where it comes from. Like, where do those ideas even mature to the point that somebody would feel like it's you know I guess that's where conspiracies come from. 'Cause, I mean, that's some creativity that sometimes I just wonder where it comes from. Like, where do those ideas even mature to the point that somebody would feel like it's you know. I guess that's where conspiracies come from. 'Cause, I mean, that's some creativity that sometimes I just wonder where it comes from. Like, where do those ideas even mature to the point that somebody would feel like it's
Yeah, conspiracy theorists definitely um, their rampant speculation that comes from not only being uninformed but not desiring to
Be
learn
informed.
the correct information. It's a there's a there's an element of when you're trying to come up with new perspectives on things that it's fun to go down new and novel routes, but you can't do that with everything, especially when you're trying to find the real solution. That's what Occam's razor is for. When you're trying to actually find the solution, you're trying to find the most logical and most well reasoned explanation that is closest to what aligns with the um, information and available facts. Uh, when people start just random, like, there are an infinite number of things that you could come up with to describe the origin of the universe. Comic book writers do this shit all the time. Does this mean the DC multiverse is as plausible as the Big Bang Theory? Of course not. Um, but what it doesn't mean is that the person who is willing to look at the possibility for infinite uh, possibilities in creation gives equal weight to the unequally credible theories. Like, I don't ever give weight to the notion that the whatever the DC universe multiverse writers are doing is the basis for our actual universe. That would just be an insane person. Is it possible? Of course. But is it likely? Of course not. This is where the being open to the possibility for something does not mean you have to equally give weight to all possibilities. And that's just something that um, people who don't understand science and don't want to understand science just, I guess, probably will never understand. It's like when I'm searching for the 1% answer in the answer in the 1% margin of error versus the answer in the 3% margin of error versus the answer in the 5% margin of error, there's going to be different confidence levels with those answers. But looking at the stuff that's in the 95% of the unlikely, it's very easy to say that those things are most likely unlikely because of the way that sampling works and the way that science works. So that's why it's like when people talk about science, just making random guesses about the origin of something or the start of something is not scientific. Or the what Ancient Aliens does is nowhere near actual science. Just saying, oh, I'm looking at this object and this artifact. What if aliens did it? That's not science. Um, it's a poor representation of a bastardized version of folklore at best, and intentional conflation of pseudoscience and uh, what is meant to be exploration of history and science academically. Um, so again, that's why I've seen every single episode of Ancient Aliens, um, not because I am I hate it, not because I love it, but because when these things exist and I have to deal with the byproducts, I need to understand um, the mindset of somebody who believes the ancient alien theory. I need to understand the mindset of somebody who's willing to watch 15 seasons of Finding Bigfoot, no discovery of Bigfoot, and then believe in Bigfoot more than they believe in racism in America. I need to understand that person's mindset because those are the people that I have to deal with as a black person in America that effectively make my life worse by not realizing their own situation. So that's why it's like I don't see ancient aliens as an innocuous cultural phenomenon. I think it is a harmful, uh, actively damaging piece of media that is just a recurring symptom of this ingrained uh, white supremacy that is becoming ever better at hiding itself.
I think you bring up a great point in regards to the dissemination of information and who the disseminations target. I think that there's a stratification of information sharing that's meant to reach the eyes, ears, and minds of various levels of our socioeconomic stratification. So there's information that's supposed to be easily digestible to people in various social levels or social castes. When we talk about the Concorde news or the Mach 5 civilian transport news and basically sharing that as some sort of accomplishment, I think it's supposed to be a matter of for maybe the bourgeoisie or the middle class or even the lower middle class people who consume that information. They're supposed to hear it and say, I'm very proud to be part of a country that has such fast technology or technology that allows me to travel so quickly. Even though they'll personally never be able to take advantage of it, they're supposed to be able to feel inspired by the fact that there's a contract between that private company and the Department of Defense or whoever to develop executive or civilian transport that goes that fast. But I'm not sure if it's supposed to be a matter of this is something that you can do too, or maybe it's news that's supposed to reach people and send different messages. So the people who aren't able to ever afford that and think only about how much more legroom they can get on a commercial flight, they're thinking more about how great it is that there's such advanced technology, and then at the same time that information is reaching somebody who's just doing like a data dump on their morning, like before their morning coffee or drinking their morning tea or whatever, and they're saying, oh well, that's something that I can do myself, or that's a way that I can travel more quickly from coast to coast. So and then if we're talking about the History Channel, or if we're talking about Ancient Aliens, I mean that's not really. I mean that's not, I think we can establish that that's not really news. It's predominantly speculation. So, and we have a lot of commercial news that's also exists in the realm of speculation or conjecture. It's a lot of it is gaslighting. If somebody who feels that they're on the left wing side of things, or that feel if they define the difference between themselves in terms of the color of their political party being blue or red, they'll oftentimes hear something on a more conservative news station, and they'll think to themselves, "Oh, I can't stomach that. I can't stand that." Instead of analyzing it for the techniques that are being used to manipulate the people who are listening to it, they're basically using it to drive a sense of division instead of understanding the mechanism that's being utilized to control or to influence the minds of somebody who, like you said, is influenced by the conjecture about Bigfoot based off of the History Channel, as opposed to actually accepting the plight of an entire people that's existed in reality since the founding of a specific nation and even before.
Yeah, and I only make that comparison because it's often the same group of people that believe in Bigfoot and UFOs with very scant evidence that's actually reliable, that also then can't see racism and can't see white privilege and don't understand the history of slavery as to why, like, nobody's asking white people today to apologize for slavery. That's not what it's like. Those people just can't. It's the same people, and that's why, again, I always end up pointing at those things, because there's a whole methodology of undermining the construction of how facts are understood, as to why those types of TV shows allow people to then um, believe in ridiculous things with no evidence, and then dismiss things with tons of evidence. Um, so it's the same group of people that, again, all that said, I'm not saying Bigfoot doesn't exist. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying there's not a whole lot of real evidence that we coexist with that, with Gigantopithecus. Gigantopithecus certainly existed. There's just not a whole lot of evidence that we coexist with it. And as these people who, you know, swear up and down they heard Bigfoot or saw Bigfoot, but then never learn the coyote howl, or what a wolf howl sounds like, or all the different variations, to then say, are you sure that wasn't a bear or a wolf or a coyote or something? Like, people will hear something for the first time or see the something for the first time and jump to the most absurd conclusion, as if that's scientific. And that's kind of where then Ancient Alien turns around and tells them that the people who uh, went through painstaking effort to record something somehow misinterpreted it, and that they actually meant extraterrestrials.
Well, that's an excellent segue into discussing the predisposition of many humans to go towards the realm of perceptual and psychological irrationality to explain rational phenomenon, or phenomena that have a rational explanation if only some empirical research was done, and then draw conclusions about their interpretation of reality on that, and how contagious those conclusions are, and how easily disseminated and spread and solidified those ideas can be, to the point that entire industries and commercial empires and information sharing empires and conglomerates can be made out of those types of um, emotional responses, or those visceral, immediate responses, or those irrational lines of thought.
I think it's the same group of people who want to have it's the insider knowledge. They want to know something that you don't, right? And so I think that the internet has actually made it possible for that that group of people to find each other. I think social networking itself has helped them. I mean, flat Earth. That's a group of people where their numbers grow regularly because they can find each other now, and it's not just like limited to that monthly publication that's printed locally at their favorite bookstore slash magazine shop, which probably doesn't exist anymore. And they don't have to go way out of their way to seek out like that weird guy at the convention who's got the booth that's a little subpar, but they can they can afford their booth fee, so they can get in at the convention. Also, I don't think that something like that could have been it. I don't think it could have been mainstream without the internet. At least not Ancient Aliens. It would have just been like another you know subsection of a tabloid for a long time, and eventually
Right.
people would have forgotten about it, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right in that um, the niche culture is what persisted until the internet allowed people to connect, and then because it was even what is it, Comic Con? I think has been around since the 70s. Um,
Look that up.
like I believe late 70s. So it's even things like that
It was
where
founded in March 21 of 1970.
yeah. So early 70s. It just wasn't popular. Like people were doing it, but Comic Con didn't really become a huge deal until the internet. And that's kind of where, those kinds of I would go to conventions when I was a kid and they were just niche and you would have to be on a mailing list to know when they were happening. Otherwise, you're not going to know that it even happened.
Yeah.
Um, and that's kind of where the whole dressing up and going all out in the cosplay stuff. That's relatively recent in that it's not that cosplay didn't exist. It just was not that widespread before the internet. So you see these things where the internet just helped these cultures proliferate so much, but at the same time, then
Furries.
people, well, right, yeah, but then people commodifying the stuff and then turning it into like, you know, it's weird that Comic Con as a thing now, they're like, how can we make money off of it when we can't bring people here live? Okay, we can sell a bunch of toys, special toys. We can have special events and all these other things, and people pay for the virtual attendance. And it's like because they can't make money off of the local Comic Con, they can't just do it. They have to figure out how they can extract the most money out of it in the virtual setting. And again, it's this weird um like as a comic book lover and a comic book fan, being in that culture, I like the fact that it became popular, but then once it becomes to a certain point, then it's just about making money off of the person who likes comic books, and then it's completely disingenuous, and it's just the economy trying to like suck from you as much as it possibly can with the appearance of giving you comic books that you want, but in a lot of times it's just half-ass bullshit to take your money, and that's where that paradigm of like finding what is popular and then pushing a bunch of bullshit to just sap the money from that group because they're like, oh, we enjoy this thing. Let's pretend this is this thing. We'll give them the cheap version and make a bunch of money off of it and then move on to the next group.
So, what are they going to do? Are they going to like rent virtual time with a drone and go around a virtual booth space? Or are they just going to create a website that's essentially a portal to all of the vendors' personal websites? Or do the vendors have to set up their own booth website or a booth page inside the Comic Con virtual environment? I want to know what I'm paying for here, you know? Like,
Right. Well,
is it gonna be
again, I
is it
think
gonna
it's
be
a
a VR
combination of all
Comic
of the
Con?
above. And that's where they've been trying to figure out what they're doing. And this is where DC went off and did their own. Now DC's doing fandom. This is a whole thing in the industry that's causing this rift because Comic Con was like the main hub before, and now that everything has gone virtual for this year at least, now people are like, oh, I guess we can do our own thing, or Disney's like, oh, we can do our own thing, and it's really like when people struggle to find ways to make money off of the uh, group that they're trying to exploit, then it becomes really like people start backbiting really quick, and that's why it sort of fractured off so quick. Um, but yeah, that was the original intention, is what you're talking about. But they can't do it as much because it was so obvious as a money grab. That again, that's why sort of DC split off on their own thing now. Um, think Marvel even has some sort of virtual event that's coming up, if I'm not mistaken. So it's like, yeah, this whole year has then, obviously shifted a lot of cultures, but within the one of the cultures that was dependent upon people getting together in person and then sharing pictures of themselves to then make those events popular, but also elite for being um, unattainable for other people to visit. That culture got thrown off. So you can't be showing off that you flew to San Diego for Comic Con and you got dressed up like Thanos and you went all out and did your cosplay and then you get all those Instagram likes and that just shows that person is upper class and leisure class. So because they can't do that this year, they're trying to figure out ways to say, oh, how can we show people are still leisure class and associated with San Diego Comic Con by blowing a bunch of money on it, but actually making it worth it? So it's like
You
they
think
have
that
these exclusive San Diego Comic Con toys now. I mean, they've been doing that forever,
well, you
or
think that they could.
exclusive comics and shit like that. But now that's the main focus is like, what can we make exclusive to sell you? Like the fucking Transformers that they're trying to sell are like ridiculously
Yeah.
overpriced. They're like, I think the lowest one I saw was like $200.
Oh,
Um,
I saw some for just over $100, but they were really tiny.
right? Yeah,
Um,
the tiny one's
well,
probably
you think they could
100, but
spend
I'm talking about like
that like
6 inches or more, that shit's gonna be like 200 or $1,000, like at the lowest. And again, that's where they're like, oh, we'll do an exclusive anime Transformers series this year and a San Diego Comic Con exclusive, and then we'll charge $1,000 for an
yeah,
11-inch
man.
Megatron or
I
some
feel like
shit. Where you're like,
they could just spend the
okay,
money that they
I
were gonna
wanted a
throw on a.
Transformers thing, but not anymore because this just looks like you're trying to grab my fucking money.
Yeah, no,
I
they could
mean,
if they were
that's
to
what
take
Transformers was in the first place.
if they were to
But
spend the $2,000 to $3,000 that they would have spent on a hotel, on a website,
right.
and a photographer, they would be ahead of the curve with their own website. And the only thing that they're missing out on is the Comic Con, publication action. When really they're just going to be tying into the feed anyways with hashtag Comic Con or hashtag almost Comic Con or hashtag wish we could have been at Comic Con or whatever the hashtag is that they would come, because all those vendors and all those costume makers and the models and the people that are supposed to be getting their feet indoors or whatever they're doing, all of that money that they spend, and I know some people are getting, they're getting to write it off somehow, but that means they still have the money in the first place. They could be doing a lot more interesting things than spending, you know, a weekend or a week, partying and wearing costumes and swapping fluids with strangers. They could be generating, an actual infrastructure for a business. They could be marketing themselves as artists or creators of some type.
Which begs the question, is that really something that they would want? Or are they just in the status culture for the experience so they can say they did it?
Which is,
Yeah.
full circle. I think that's what it's become because it once again became popular and then commodified, and it was all about the money and how much money you could then throw away on Comic Con. Like, oh, who has the best, most extravagant costume that's the most detailed? Oh, I put $30,000 into this Iron Man suit or this Hulkbuster or whatever. This is a life-size replica Hulkbuster that I, spent $100,000 on to take to Comic Con. And then it just becomes this fucking pissing contest
And then,
of,
and then it's
yeah,
never seen
throw the most
again.
money away.
They break it out one time, and then nobody hires them to show up at their Iron Man event in the Hulkbuster costume. And so they've got this $100,000 costume that they can't actually take trick or treating because that's $100,000 to be
I
walking
mean,
around in.
but again, that person's doing that shit to show that they can throw that money away. They don't need to get hired to a party or anything. And that's what I'm saying. It's like the person that can like build a Hulkbuster for one day is like doing that shit to show that they don't actually care about the comics. They just care about showing that they fucking can throw that money away because, as you're saying, you can only use that shit like once. And then it becomes this relic of like, oh, that one time at Comic Con I did this, and that's why they need the pictures and they need the fucking social reinforcement for justifying that extravagant, uh, just trash expense. Where again, it's like, I'm not like if somebody wants to build a Hulkbuster for themselves, fucking awesome, or build a Batmobile that they're like, oh, I built this Batmobile for myself. It's the Tumblr version because I like the Christian Bale Batman. Like, yeah, that's okay. That's not the same thing because these people, there are people that do shit for themselves, and then there's people that do shit for status and clout, and then they like just throw the Hulkbuster away and move on to the next thing, and just it's now a story to them that one time they did the Hulkbuster, and it's like those two like that's why being a comic book fan then becomes difficult to express to some people because then they're like, well, you don't have a full size Hulkbuster replica in your home. Are you not a real fan? It's like, well, I don't have fucking $100,000 to throw away on that shit. So now being a real fan, quote unquote, is about how much money you can waste on something. And then you have these people who have like just a shelf full of collected things that they've never opened up and they've never actually read them. And they've never, this person has never actually read a comic book, but they've only seen the Marvel movies and they have all this shit. And now that person represents comic book collectors and comic book nerddom as the pinnacle because they have the most money to throw away on it instead of the people who've read the most comic books.
Extreme Costumes has a Facebook page and a YouTube page and an Instagram page, but they don't actually have their own Extreme Costumes website.
Who's this?
The guy that made the Hulkbuster costume. He's made a Bumblebee costume and a bunch of other stuff too. But they have a Facebook page, but they don't, and an Instagram and a YouTube, but they don't have their own actual extremecostumes.com. That's the part that I was like, that's why I'm confused. It's like they can spend the money on a giant ass costume, but they can't get their own fucking .com up and running.
They don't need it. That's what I'm saying. They don't need it. They don't need to fucking go to shows to perform to make money to justify spending the money on the costume because they're throwing that fucking money away on the costume because they probably inherited it in the first place, which is why they don't like. That is so far from a business concept for them that they don't even have a website to aggregate their own pictures.
They use Instagram and Facebook for their pictures. They don't even have a website for their own. They don't even have their own platform. They use somebody else's platform.
Because they don't want their own platform. This is purely an exercise in displaying extravagant wealth to throw away that money. Even down to the point of it's spiteful. It's straight up spiteful for them not to have their own fucking website in 2020. Like, if you're saying, I'm going to throw all this money into something and not have my own website for it, and I'm just going to put my pics on Instagram, that's some spiteful ass elitist shit, man. Because then that, for all the people who have to do business and have to have business cards, you have to have a website, you have to have your CV, you have to have fucking grandma's
I found it.
Type shit.
It's called Morph Labs, Morph Costumes, morphsuits.com. And that's where he's got his stuff up. Okay. Adult morph suits. No, this is just a place that sells stuff. Never mind. I was wrong. I got excited because they had a profile for him.
Well, this just sounds like a reinforcement of sales and marketing culture. Like when you said, "Oh, you've never, how could you possibly be a comics enthusiast or a DC Marvel Universe mythos enthusiast if you haven't built this $100,000 suit or have this collection of high-priced memorabilia or goods or comic collections that are special edition X, Y, and Z instead of actually appreciating the story and the history and the theories and the themes and all of that. It's basically the same as saying, well, how can you appreciate cars if you haven't purchased a Lamborghini for yourself? Or haven't, how, or it's the same kind of thing saying, oh, you haven't driven until you've driven insert car X here. Or the same reason why it's like, oh, if you really like flying, well, you haven't flown until you've flown in a Concorde or the next Mach 5, vehicle. It just keeps people reaching and aspiring for these levels that are unattainable unless very specific avenues are taken that are sometimes only open to people who have accumulated wealth or have received capital from means external to themselves.
The most fun sports car I've ever driven in is my 25-year-old four-wheel drive truck that can go all over the place. And I've driven some pretty quick cars, but the older I get, the more interested I am in how fast or how slow can I go at a really weird angle and climb over stuff at the same time without breaking my transmission. That to me is more fun. I remember reading when I was in high school that there were a lot of people that always compared the thrill of driving to owning an Alfa Romeo. But the older I got, the more I read that Alfa Romeos were like, you know, if Jeep is an acronym for just empty every pocket, there's no suitable acronym for Alfa Romeo other than you're going to pay a lot of money for it. And it's just there's a lot of I think there's a lot of confusion in a lot of these subcultures where the heritage is confused with quality. I think that cars are a really weird machine space in general because companies like Kia and Hyundai completely changed the landscape by offering a 10-year, 100,000-mile powertrain warranty and allowing some of their dealers to double the warranty. Like I remember for a while I think there was a dealership in Kentucky that was offering a 20-year, 200,000-mile warranty on their Hyundais and Kias. And nobody else could match that. And fuck yeah, I'm going to get a 20-year warranty car. Are you kidding me? That means they're going to buy me an engine at some point. That means they're doing really well. They're doing something right. So when a company like Kia or Hyundai Kia Auto Group, I'm sure that there's a bigger conglomerate name for it. But when they're able to create an electric vehicle that does all of the things that people want from a Tesla at a Chevrolet price point, fuck at a Kia price point, and they're actually good looking cars. They're loaded. I mean, of course, they're loaded with technology. They're electric cars. But they're you know loaded to the brim with technology. I don't think that it requires a superstar level figure or a face of a company to deliver that kind of product or experience, or even if they're selling identity. I think that it's still unnecessary. I think that there's a
You
way
know
to
who
do all of
Kia,
this without it.
you know who runs Kia without googling the name?
No, I don't.
That proves the point.
Yeah.
I doubt anybody listening to this knows the person who runs Kia without googling it. Like if you know the owner of Kia, you probably own stock or some shit. Which good for that person. But
So
people have
I'll tell everyone now. His name is Hanwoo Park.
Hanwoo Park is not in American headlines.
Nope. unless there's some like park in suburbia in like somewhere on the west coast that we don't know about. That's like the only place I can think of that might be named Hanwoo Park, but it's definitely not in the news.
And it's the same shit with any other car company except for Tesla at this point. Like, I can't name the head of Ford. I can't name the head of fucking Toyota, um, fucking Daimler Chrysler, because they don't matter. They don't matter in a fucking machine that employs thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people. There's no individual figurehead that's making all of the decisions for all of the entire company. That notion is completely absurd. And to have Elon Musk being that type of figure in 2020 is just, I think it's like a vestigial remnant of um, romanticized feudalism and an individual king type figure who can dictate the his court from a high and have all of the knowledge and all of the wisdom to make sure that yes, he can build cars and build rockets because he's just that type of king. And we can't pronounce his child's name because we're plebes.
No, his child's name is pronounced Kyle.
Man.
That's how you spell Kyle in
Oh
Elon.
God.
I'm serious. Like, I don't care what they say his name is supposed to be pronounced like. Just because they spell it like that, he gets to be called Kyle till the end of time.
Oh man, payback for all of the minorities who had their names mispronounced over the course of forever. We're calling him Kyle.
Fucking Kyle Musk.
Kyle Musquet.
Kyle Musquet. Yeah, in Musquet feudalism, the car drives you.
Yeah, man. Yeah, Kyle Musquet is we'll see if he accomplishes anything of note. Kyle Musquet, who had 2 generations of head start, does he invent anything that advances human civilization? He got a whole lot of weight on his shoulders.
I think the weight on his shoulders is how long will it take for him to spend the money?
Right.
Because as the third generation of wealth, he's not, according to the all the studies that examine generational wealth, and he's not gonna be able to sustain it. He's definitely not gonna build it. Did Elon's father build the wealth, or did Elon's grandfather build the wealth?
Their exploited workers built the wealth.
No, okay. So which one of them amassed the wealth then?
What's up?
Was it his grandfather or his father that amassed the
I
wealth?
think his grandfather.
Oh, so in that sense, Elon really isn't building anything. He's just reorganizing other people's ideas and money.
Yep, 1,000%.
So at that point, his son
Even
Kyle is definitely only going to be around to spend the money.
I think he got a 4.9 million subsidy, or billion subsidy, not million. I'm sorry, that would be stupid. We wouldn't even talk about if it was 4.9 million. Please, it was 4. I think it was 4.5 or 4.9 billion.
4.9.
Yeah, there you go.
4.9 billion in government subsidies.
Yep. And then he tries to talk about
he doesn't like the stimulus.
Socialism is bad. Good for him, bad for us.
Well, that's just, people who want the resources allocated to them. I mean, it becomes very transparently selfish at that point. I think people in that position understand that they can exploit the offerings of the system to get resources funneled towards their endeavors and to expand the systems that they're trying to put in place or the infrastructures that they're trying to build to perpetuate their own successes. But they don't want money going in any other direction. They don't want capital or resources going in any other direction because it's quite transparent to see that it certainly serves their purposes to maintain the capital distribution the way it is, and in fact concentrate it more towards people of their means.
Yeah, because then, I think Americans, like, obviously Americans don't know how their financial system works. So, like, that's clear. But it gets to the point where I'm concerned about what Americans think is actually happening in their system because I'm not sure. I don't know if Americans understand what happens when they put money in the bank. I'm not sure if they don't understand they're not buying their money back from the bank when they take it out. Um, it's like that sounds crazy. Um, but I've had people read my book, and then I'm trying to explain to them um, how the United States dollar has a varying value, and I'm like realizing this is the first time, like when people encounter this concept in my book, it's like the first time they've even thought about that notion. And it's like when I get to talk to people and see them walk through this concept with them for the first time, it's like it's disconcerting to say the least that many people get so far existing as Americans without ever analyzing that concept. But then to think even further that people are disconnected with how their money works actively, but then don't question it beyond that. Um, yeah, that shit scares me because then that's how you end up with like people who think they're liberal because they just don't actively espouse opinions that are openly subjugative, but they put their money in places that subjugate people with capital accumulation, um, or support things that repeatedly subjugate people. Because it's like, I can say definitively, I haven't eaten Chick-fil-A in over 7 years because they don't support uh, the LGBTQ plus community. So I'm not fucking eating their chicken anymore. It's not that good anyway. So I'm
I've
not
eaten
doing it.
I've eaten one of their sandwiches, a couple of their sandwiches within the last decade, but I didn't pay for them.
And I'm not trying to shame anybody that has, but I'm saying
I'm not paying for that shit.
as exactly that's the only
Like I don't pay for Jimmy John's
influence as
either.
a consumer I have.
I won't pay for Jimmy John's. I won't pay for Chick-fil-A. I refer to those places as fuck that place. There's a lot of different reference restaurants with that name, but they all have the same name to me. It's fuck that place. I'm not eating there. If I go to the length of saying I'm not eating there, it means that I have deep respect for the person who suggested it. But yeah, I don't want to. It's not even Chick Fil A's. Chick Fil A's put their money into groups that actively have sought to change the laws in African countries that make homosexuality illegal, punishable by death. You can't eat one of their chicken sandwiches and pretend to be an ally. It just doesn't work. You can't support a company that actively seeks to kill people because of their sexual preference. That shouldn't even be an issue for a chicken sandwich company.
Well, that's how you get people who are superficially liberal.
Yeah.
They make their decisions based off of who seems the nicest, um, who says the things that make them feel most comfortable about the financial decisions that they make. So they can maybe have the trade off of, oh, sure, I'll patronize this business, or I don't have to think about what businesses I patronize as long as I vote for the politician who says the things that sound the most liberal to me, or that make me not feel like a fence sitter. I don't have to be active if all these other people are being activists for me without actually looking into voting records or dismissing voting records altogether or previous political decisions altogether, um, in terms of how they affected the current social landscape, just so that way they can feel comfortable about the decisions they make financially in their daily lives, regardless of whether or not they support organizations that contribute to the disenfranchisement or the oppression of other human beings, either domestically or abroad.
Papa John's is another one. I don't care if they fired their CEO and have a new board of directors. That entire pizza empire was built on the backs of people that are being taken advantage of too. And their pizzas weren't even that good. I'm sorry, I'm mad at food right now.
Well, again, Papa John's, yeah, they were actively exploiting all kinds of people in that. I remember when they first started doing the delivery fee, getting asking the driver if they got the fee, and he was like, "No, we don't get $1 from it." And that's when I stopped ordering from Papa John's. But it was like, realizing that they had the audacity to add on a fucking delivery fee and then not give any of it to the fucking driver. And I'm like, how many people? Because then that's when I started asking, if there's a delivery fee, like what percentage goes to the driver? Because a lot of times you gotta make sure that at least some of it goes to the driver, because they'll be, that's where these fucking DoorDash and Uber Eats companies, they'll get you because they'll say, "Oh, we get a $5 delivery fee," and then the driver gets $2 off that shit. And then you don't realize it, and then you're like, "Oh, I don't need to tip them. They got a $5 delivery fee," and it's like, nope, they only actually got $2 out of that shit because DoorDash has to get paid too for giving them the opportunity to serve you. And it's like this weird delusion of a lack of subjugation because they got paid, or there's the perception that they got paid in the process. And that's why it's so dangerous, when people are like permitted to disconnect their feeling of responsibility via a monetary exchange with the feeling that the monetary exchange was somehow fair to the person getting exploited. Um,
Man,
you know,
I haven't used a like straight to your door, DoorDash, or any of those kind of services in several years. Um, I kind of took it upon myself to cook a lot more, even before the pandemic started. And it was probably the best decision I've ever made, because a lot of the things that I used to get delivered, like a pizza, I actually appreciate a pizza more now that I don't get one like with any regularity. And the part of getting ordering Chinese food that was fun for me was going to the Chinese restaurant, not necessarily having the food at home, because I was going to take it home and eat it anyways. but uh, but actually being there and smelling the kitchen and smelling like all of those different dishes as they get brought out, and being reminded that like there's a type of cuisine out there that's more interesting than just your standard fare of, I don't know, what's American cuisine, a buffet. Trying to think, a burger place. What is it? What's the standard fare for American food? Is it even is it even like unique to America at this point? Fried food, is that what's the standard?
I think it's just like some sort of protein and starch combination.
Oh,
Meat,
that sounds like a paste.
potatoes.
That actually sounds, actually no. You know what? With the right kind of seasoning, that could be like an Impossible sausage, or a, what's that other not meat company called?
Beyond.
Yeah, Beyond. It could be like a Beyond sausage, starch and protein combination.
Well, but this convo, we're getting back to, in this country's paradigm, you have to invent something, quote unquote, or discover something to be deemed worthy of becoming upper class, elite, wealthy. But what's the last food that was invented here? Like a fucking hot dog or something? I mean, I don't even think hamburger was invented here. Um,
Well, minced meats, minced beef has been a part of practically every culture, every culinary tradition that
yeah.
exists. Like from the onset, once they figured out how to create a knife and that they could just chop up meat into this tiny, thin pieces, a minced meat or a ground meat was fairly common. I think like every culinary tradition has a ground meat dish of some sort, and not encased in sausage tubing or intestines, but just cooked into the whatever else is cooked into, a sauce or a stew or a soup, or pan fried somehow, wrapped in something like a tamale. I'm pretty sure that they've all come up with their own version of ground meat. It's just that America is so young that the culture is still really young compared to the rest of the world. That I think America's contributions were all post-industrial, like canned vegetables and canned soups and canned meats and yeah, canned foods, freeze dried foods, microwave dinner. That's really America's contribution because all of the techniques that you find at a fusion restaurant exist within another culture.
Well, there's a like a fetishized lens through which the entrepreneurial endeavor is viewed in this country.
Uh,
Yeah, that's most definitely that lens is what's clearly um making something like, I think in a lot of people's heads, Henry Ford invented the car because of the way that the entrepreneurial
no, he just had the idea for the assembly line.
right, exactly. But that's what I'm saying. In America, because the romanticization of inventors has been so blurred with the need for elite to have narratives constructed around them to create a false sense of grandeur. That's why, like I'm saying, I think in most people's heads, it's like Henry Ford invented the car because they are just like, oh, he's famous for cars, so it must be he invented them or something. They don't care to actually figure out, like, no, it was the assembly line because the facts got muddled in their historical files, like in their head. But again, this gets back to
Oh
the
God, where is it? Auto
like
combustion.
Americans just want everything to be so easily digestible that um it's even really difficult to nail down a specific invention of the automobile because of the different
Okay, so the
use.
internal four-stroke combustion engine was designed by a German guy named Nicholas Otto, and that's where all of our automobiles come from for the most part. But
It had
during the
steering, so that's what I'm saying is
yeah
like the different parts happened at different
yeah
times. So like what we know now is like many different pieces.
yeah, but like that's where we get automobile from is this German guy from the 1860s. Like
But they
it,
had invented that shit in China before that dude.
no,
Like,
I know that's the thing. Is like that's where we get it. We get it from a European guy because there's no way that anyone else could have invented a cart or a multi-cycle engine.
yeah. And that's again, it's like
This is revisionist history at its finest.
totally revisionist history. And then that's why again, it's like trying to unpack this sort of, when people learn shit's way more complicated than they were told, it becomes difficult for them to handle it when they're over a certain age, I think. Or I think of a certain mindset. I don't think age is the most influential characteristic, but it's definitely an influential. I think the resistance to change is more influential, but people who are resistant to change definitely do not handle um, learning that the things that they learned are more complex than they were previously taught.
Or if they learn that they're more complex than they were previously taught, a lot of people tend to reject that notion and they stay couched in the complacency that they've established for themselves in believing that what they've learned is the end all be all. So they don't really evolve their perceptions or their analyses beyond a specific point.
Yeah, that's definitely spot on. And I think again, one of the big issues is like because they are told that their ability to take in and reject facts is an individual choice, and all of their opinions and their views of the world are protected by the First Amendment. This false sense of what the First Amendment of was created to protect is then used to perpetuate stupidity by people who are intentionally uh, obfuscating the real intention of the First Amendment.
I wonder how many people have been in a foreign country and been arrested and then proclaimed that their First Amendment rights have been violated.
Oh my God, yeah, yeah. Although I bet that foreign country would be Mexico because the likelihood of Americans actually leaving this country or their state for that matter is not very high. In fact, it's like a 1 in 3 chance that they'll actually leave the country. So
Canada? You think they went to Canada?
right, yeah, Canada or Mexico, probably going shopping at a strip mall across the fucking.
Canada's been asking Americans specifically, to put their travel plans on hold repeatedly.
They're denying people seeking asylum right now from
Yeah.
America. Like, Canada's not trying to have any American bullshit like bleed through their borders.
You're a citizen of that country. It's time to keep that political taint away from us for now.
Yeah, people who are not Canadian citizens or permanent residents are going to be denied entry into Canada. Still, 13,000 people have been denied entry. Let's see what else. Now it was a couple days ago. It was like 6 days ago. The numbers have reached a total of 13,000 plus people trying to get into Canada from the United States. It's just not happening.
Well, and that's crazy too, because then it's like, who are these thousands of people trying to just leave randomly in the middle of a pandemic, not obviously not having it checked out or cleared, because then they're rejected at the border. So it's like, what just makes these people think that they can waltz over into fucking Canada right now? That's the weirdest thought process.
Well, maybe they didn't like this country so much they decided to leave, and they went.
I mean, at least check the fucking customs border control website before you try to hop on a plane or on a train or some shit. Like, oh yeah, guys, we're not accepting you right now. Go home. Go back home. We don't want you. They just paid a lot of money to get rejected at the border. That's why I'm saying, like,
Canada has. I should look it up. Canada. I'm not sure if it has universal health care, or do they have the universal basic income provision going on right now with their citizens?
They have universal health care, which would come with like a 50% income tax. But I do believe they also have some sort of provisional UBI, which is like, I don't think it was as much as people were posting on the memes. Like, the memes were trying to say it was 2,000 a month or something, but I don't think it was that high.
Because if we have people by the millions losing their homes and their jobs, it stands to reason that at least a few thousand of them would try and go to a country where they hear about these safety nets.
Yeah,
try and become citizens of that country.
It costs something like $1,500 to $7,000 just to relocate into Canada, and that doesn't include the property that you'll have to own, the job that you'll have to maintain, the $45,000 patriation fee, the all of the other issues that would come with trying to relocate into Canada right now. Like, where are they going to stay for 2 weeks minimum?
How are they in typical American fashion, they'll just
do it.
The government to take care of it. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's another thing people aren't really aware of, is how much it actually costs to move to another country, to actually become a citizen of that country, so that you have rights and have access to government services, social welfare services. That stuff doesn't. I mean, you got to buy into it basically, no matter what you do. I think I read about Canadians who expatriated, who tried to move back to Canada, being charged again to repatriate. So it's like, they're getting charged twice as much because they left once and were like, sorry guys, we made a mistake. Okay, let us back in.
Well, if you think about it, it's kind of like paying up for taxes you haven't paid
Yeah,
in the meantime.
you got to
So
pay into the
I
system.
get it. I kind of understand the premise, but that's just because we're all money to these governments, and
Yeah,
we're all just forms of income, and that's how they all see us. So that's where it's not logical or ethical, but I get it.
I'm trying to think of what what does an ethical government look like? New Zealand? Only in the time of COVID though, because they've had like 100 days without a reported case.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like, well, yeah, and again, that's like they only recently transitioned to their new leader.
Yeah,
What was it like last year? I think.
yeah. So they've really only been uh, an ethical government for the past 5 months.
Yeah, basically.
I hear
I
Finland looks pretty good.
thought Finland had some problems too recently. Maybe it was Norway. No, Norway was in the news.
Well, I think all of those countries have some immigration issues that they can't um, ethically address, in that they are exploiting populations of immigrants, but then also trying to legislate those immigrants out of their society after exploiting them. So, um, yeah, I think again, there's no 100% ethical government, but yeah, I think Finland is definitely one of the better representatives in the world. I want to say South Korea. Um, I haven't been to Japan, so I don't know firsthand. Um, but again, obviously nobody is devoid of problems. But from what I could tell, it definitely seems like South Korea is like trying to make everything accessible for their people as equally uh, distributed as possible in the real world. Um, but not to say, obviously it's not perfect. It's just a matter of, again, we're talking about the attempts versus hitting real world obstacles, saying, yeah, it's not going to be perfect and the execution is not going to be perfect, but at least they're trying.
And Finland's approach to homelessness as well, in I think the past 7 years or so, has definitely provided a framework that could be, ethically adopted by other countries if they only put the resources towards them. I mean, Finland is essentially subsidizing the creation of high quality living facilities and apartments for people who literally have no job and no home, and putting them in them, and I believe also subsidizing their living, and giving them an income until they're able to either resolve whatever long-term issues that landed them in homelessness in the first place, be it addiction or mental health, and also providing them with treatment options on top of that. So they've made it a priority.
Finland. Finland. I think is it Finland that they created biathlon for? I think it is. Uh, it's cross country skiing and shooting. I'm pretty sure it's for Finland. Oh no, Norwegian. It's a Norwegian ski patrol. Sorry, that was a tangent.
But yeah, I think It was around 2015. They had a lot of Syrian immigrants, and the Finnish population seemed to have a lot of racist right wing response to the immigrants, and that's kind of where nationalism has been kind of rampant in the um, uh, European and Norwegian regions. In that, uh, again, they exploit. They have their allies destroying these people's countries, and then the immigrants come in and they exploit the immigrants and then get all racist and try to kick the immigrants out. So it's this cycle that keeps happening in different countries, and Finland just happens to be one of them. That's where it's like, I love what they're doing for white people in Finland, but there's some shit that they're not doing for brown people that think they need to address. And that's why it's like, again, it's hard. It's hard to try to give anybody credit in 2020 because there's too many post-colonial and right-wing nationalist states that exist in the West that also are then progressive in certain ways to then try to be like, oh man, they're doing really good on the environment. They're actually doing really good on green energy.
Well,
but god damn it, they still treat immigrants like shit.
I mean,
Well, it
Sentinel
reminds me
Islands.
of the paradigm in the United States where you have these large industries or these service industries or these agricultural industries that largely rely upon immigrant labor. And there's this paradigm where you have left wing or liberal or blue politicians advocating for influxes of immigrants into the country, so that way they can secure votes. But they're also at the same time supporting the placement for very
It looks like I lost
Lose
some
him?
signal.
I
Yeah.
can't tell if he's frozen, if we lost him.
I think he's well, he's definitely frozen.
Well, I mean, I can't tell if the Zoom signal has dropped him or not, because sometimes people will freeze and then they'll come back. But it looks like we lost him.
Yeah, I can still see your voice on the meter, so at least it's coming out of the thing. So mostly still on here. Come on, Daniel, unfreeze.
Oh, yeah, we dropped him.
Yeah.
But yeah, again, that's an example of that shit where we're in the middle of a podcast and his computer just decides to drop the signal. And that's like, he paid for that shit. He bought that computer. Capitalism told him that shit's supposed to work. And then it craps out in the middle of a fucking podcast. And that's a perfect example of some shit that frustrates me repeatedly about why you can't be satisfied without end up getting screwed over. So you have to kind of perpetually be dissatisfied even when the shit seems to be good. And then it then creates this weird subculture of like, oh, you're never satisfied. And it's like, well, partially because I'm expecting this thing that works to stop working randomly. Or, there's times where like, so I was trying to install something for a customer. Well, I go through, he asked me to write down the instructions for him so then he could have the instructions on his own. In the process, I'm realizing to like download this one program, you have to click download 3 fucking times and then click yes before a program actually downloads. And that's normal these days. Like, and that's where I'm like, oh shit, this shit is so obtuse that for a person who didn't grow up in it during all of the transitions, jumping into technology, if you click download, you're going to expect it to download, not think you're going to have to go to another screen and click download here. and then that's going to take you to another screen, and then you got to click download there, and then you have to click OK one more time. And I'm writing these instructions out, and I'm like, well, fuck, no wonder certain demographics just have a hard time existing right now, because things are so poorly designed, but then sold as if they're supposed to work out of the box, but only to a very small portion of our actual population. And it's like there's only a small percentage of people who can take devices right out of a box and have them work. And then even sometimes you take it out of the box and the shit doesn't work because you just happen to get a bad device, and you have to be a damn near professional to be able to figure that out. And it's like that situation where I'm like, well, we have one of our podcasters like losing the signal in the middle. And it's like, that shit is like, I see TN put in so much work in getting the signal and all this shit worked out. And then the fucking computer fails on him, or on Daniel. And then it undermines all of TN's work. And then it's like, the whole, I'm frustrated at capitalism because this is so frequent that you have something that you paid money for that you expect to work, and then in the middle of when you actually need it to work, it stops fucking working. I know there's been probably a ton of people who are listening to this have been in a Zoom meeting that are trying to work, and the Zoom chat just stops fucking working, whether it's Zoom itself or the computer. And then you're like, well, shit, I paid X amount of dollars for this computer. I don't know what the fuck's wrong with it. And then you're supposed to be able to just get through that as if, capitalism just didn't throw you in this hole to then fend for yourself for something you paid an exorbitant amount of money for that now doesn't work for you. And that shit just gets to be so frustrating in that, again, now we got Daniel back, but his machine that he paid for, fucking, it failed him for the 2 hours that he needed it. And that's like, he can't go back to that company and then get reprieve for those lost 2 hours. And that sounds insane, but I found out that's what happens in other countries. If somebody wastes your time, there's laws in place that actually end up protecting your time and getting you compensated for that shit. I did not find that out until I was on a delayed flight 2 years ago between Ireland and Chicago. My flight got delayed for 24 hours. Well, apparently, because I was on a business trip, that is they have to compensate me for that shit. And I got enough money for that to be a story, in that I didn't even know that was possible, let alone a thing in other countries where if you pay somebody to do something for you, like fly you from one destination to another, if they experience a delay that's longer than 3 hours and it impacts your life, they have to compensate you for it. It sounds crazy. It sounds insane in America because we've been made so used to having our time wasted and our money just burned on shit that we paid for that doesn't work. And then we have to pay more money to get it to work again, and have somebody tell us, oh, did you try resetting it? Like, yeah, I fucking tried resetting it. And then when they reset it, for some reason it works. And you're fucking pissed because you tried resetting it, but for whatever reason, now it just works.
Yeah.
Shit, man.
There's a variation on this. So in this country, you need a job done. Let's say you want something renovated on your house, or you have a business and you need some renovations performed. You let it be known that you need a contractor, and various contractors will bid on your project, and they have some kind of timetable that they expect to meet because they want to keep their operation moving nice and smoothly. So they have their expectations, they have their start date, their finish date, but then sometimes they run over, and there are some companies that are just poorly managed, and they always underestimate the amount of time that they need, but then they charge you extra for the job because it took longer than they projected it would. People do that shit. They're contractors. You can't see my air quotes because obviously we don't do that kind of video. But there are people out there who leverage this system that we have in ways that are just fucking insidious. There are people out there who take advantage of other people because they need somebody else to do it. And I mean, that's kind of why we have a service industry, but a service industry shouldn't be set up in such a way that it takes advantage of people like that. That's a that's one of those areas where, generating physically generating their own wealth is now unethical.
In that case, the people who are in fact, the supply in the service don't get compensated on the curve proportionate with the demand.
Yeah.
Um, when they have that uh, supply demand curve, it would be great because in times like these, yeah, then the teachers would get 4 times or 10 times their pay from normal because they're in 10 times as high demand. But guess what? Those teachers aren't getting a goddamn dime more in the fucking middle of a pandemic when teachers are quitting left and right because they don't want to be forced to work during a pandemic and the supply is dwindling steadily. There's not more money going into educating teachers or training teachers right now. It's they're having their funding cut.
There's a couple of articles about how, at least in the Northeast or in New England, people people of means, and those who have maybe children in the public school system, are pulling their kids out and sending them to private schools. So it seems like there's going to be a consolidation of resources being sent towards the private sector, the private school industry within
E-
the education sector.
Even more than that, individuals are creating micro schools. They're poaching teachers from private and public schools and saying, "Oh, we'll pay you top dollar to come teach in our backyard." This is a real thing. And that's where, again, it's like the private school is one layer, the micro school is an even higher layer that is going to get the best teachers. They're going to get the highest level of educators because they're going to be able to pay top dollar. They're going to be able to pay even more than the private schools. And that's like, um, again, this whole system is the supply is dwindling. The supply is going even lower. And the ones that are actually the main brunt aren't having their actual compensation any higher. And it's like,
Just sounds like, in the micro school paradigm, sounds like private tutors for the nobility, basically.
that's
Yeah, that's
exactly
what it
what it
sounds
is.
like.
That's exactly what it is. And, you know, relatively, it's like, yeah, those teachers that end up getting lucky enough to get adopted into that system, they're going to actually get compensated well, but they're the outliers and not the standard. So that's like what they are getting going to get compensated is what everybody should be getting compensated because the entire demand or the entire supply is being reduced and not just uh the ones that get lucky enough to get hired into the micro schools. And it's like the people that do the hiring into the micro schools, what are they going to know about hiring teachers? So it's going to just be this weird arbitrary picking from the selection of teachers that exist, and it's probably just going to be like white women teachers that they go towards, and a couple of white dudes that are the scientists and the mathematicians to
All these
perpetuate.
teachers. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say just to perpetuate the notion that women are bad at math and science.
Well, these teachers are going to become another hoarded resource.
Yep.
Essentially, they're going to be treated like a resource to be consolidated because these micro schools are going to be entities that have gatekeepers. They're going to be able to set their own rules. They're going to be able to determine who gets to come into the micro school. If it's a pandemic-based paradigm, it's going to be about, are you good enough to come into our bubble? Can we trust your medical results? Are there going to be elements of medical privacy that are going to be compromised because you're going to have to disclose, any pre-existing medical conditions that either you or your family or your child has had to determine whether or not coming into the micro school is going to be a viable option based off of the people who established it and who control it. And then ultimately, they'll get to decide who gets a pass, who gets to come into where the teachers are best.
That's exactly right, man. And again, what you're saying is like it is a neo elite tutoring program where they're once again establishing these knowledge hierarchies based on access to capital and not, the systems of information dissemination being established now are meant to reinforce feudalism and not make information equally accessible based on how things are unfolding. And it's once again, like, I don't think children ever stop being chattel in this country, but we are getting closer to a point where it's like the government is trying to treat other people's kids as chattel openly. And I think we're finally getting to a point where people are almost aware enough of it and over it enough to fight back. That's where I think too many liberal or people who believe themselves to be liberal take advantage of it and don't actually want to let go of that system and just don't they don't want to fight their racist ass grandparents or racist ass family members on Thanksgiving, and they don't want to give up their fucking Chick-fil-A and Starbucks or whatever the fuck it is that's subjugating people either, but they also want to pretend that they're liberal so they can be like, oh, I voted for Obama. I'm a liberal. I must be a liberal.
Exceptional Radio.
Voting for Obama, that was one step. That's one part of attempting to
Exceptional
show.
Randos show is produced live in Sunroom Studios Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.